Welcome to the 5-Minute Warfare podcast from 5minutewarfare.com, where we dive into history's most pivotal battles and military strategies in around 5 minutes. If you enjoy the show and would like to support us, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to 5minutewarfare.com/coffee to see how. This is episode 24, The Korean War, the Forgotten Conflict. The Korean War, often referred to as the Forgotten Conflict, was one of the most significant yet overlooked wars of the 20th century. Fought between 1950 and 1953, it was the first major military clash of the Cold War era, pitting the forces of democracy against communism in a brutal and relentless struggle. Despite its immense geopolitical consequences, the war has often been overshadowed by the Second World War that preceded it and the Vietnam War that followed. Yet the Korean War shaped the modern world, solidifying the division of Korea and setting the stage for tensions that continue to this day. The war's origins lay in the aftermath of the Second World War, when Korea, which had been under Japanese rule since 1910, was liberated by the Allied powers in 1945. The country was hastily divided along the 38th parallel, with the Soviet Union occupying the north and the United States controlling the south. This division was meant to be temporary, but as the Cold War intensified, the ideological rift between the Communist North, led by Kim Il-sung, and the capitalist South, under Syngman Rhee, deepened. Both leaders sought to unify Korea under their respective systems, and by 1950, tensions had reached breaking point. On the 25th of June 1950, North Korean forces, heavily armed and trained by the Soviet Union, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. The North's army, well disciplined and equipped with Soviet tanks and artillery, rapidly overwhelmed South Korean forces, capturing Seoul within days. The attack took the world by surprise, and the United Nations, led by the United States, quickly intervened. Under General Douglas MacArthur's command, a multinational force was assembled to repel the invasion, marking one of the first major military actions undertaken by the UN. Initially, the war seemed all but lost for the South, with North Korean troops pushing deep into the country, leaving only the area around the port city of Busan under South Korean control. However, in September 1950, MacArthur launched a bold counteroffensive with an amphibious landing at Incheon, a strategic masterstroke that caught the North Koreans off guard. The move allowed UN forces to break out of the Busan perimeter and push rapidly northward. Within weeks, they had recaptured Seoul and advanced deep into North Korean territory, nearing the Chinese border. At this critical juncture, China entered the war. Fearing an American-led invasion so close to its borders, the Chinese government, under Mao Zedong, deployed hundreds of thousands of troops, known as the People's Volunteer Army, to assist North Korea. In November 1950, these Chinese forces launched a massive counter-offensive, overwhelming UN troops and forcing them into a chaotic retreat. The war quickly turned into a brutal stalemate, with both sides suffering heavy casualties in the freezing Korean winter. By 1951, the front line had stabilized around the 38th parallel, and the war became a grueling contest of attrition. Trench warfare reminiscent of the First World War emerged, with both sides fighting bitterly over strategic hills and ridges. Battles such as Heartbreak Ridge and Porkchop Hill became synonymous with the sheer brutality of the conflict, as soldiers fought under appalling conditions for mere yards of territory. The air war was also intense, with American and Soviet pilots engaging in fierce dogfights over Korean skies, marking one of the first jet versus jet conflicts in history. As the war dragged on, peace talks began in 1951, but negotiations were slow and fraught with political posturing. The main sticking points included the fate of prisoners of war, with neither side willing to compromise on forced repatriation. Meanwhile, the fighting continued, with both sides launching offensives to gain leverage in the negotiations. Despite the military deadlock, the war had devastating effects on civilians, with millions of Koreans displaced or killed in the crossfire. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the Korean peninsula suffered immense destruction. The war finally came to an end on the 27th of July 1953, when an armistice was signed at Panmunjom. The agreement established the Korean Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, a heavily fortified border that still divides North and South Korea today. However, no formal peace treaty was ever signed, meaning that technically, the two Koreas remain at war. The Korean War left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the Cold War's future trajectory. It reinforced the policy of containment, with the United States committing itself to resisting communism wherever it emerged. It also led to the militarization of the Cold War, with both superpowers expanding their military capabilities and alliances, including the strengthening of NATO and the formation of the SEATO alliance. For Korea itself, the war's legacy was profound. The North remained under the totalitarian rule of the Kim dynasty, becoming one of the world's most isolated and militarized states. The South, despite enduring years of political instability, eventually transformed into a prosperous democracy. The war's impact on the Korean people was devastating, with families divided by the new border and entire generations scarred by the conflict's horrors. Despite its significance, the Korean War has often been overshadowed in Western historical memory, earning its reputation as the forgotten conflict. Unlike the Second World War, it did not end in a decisive victory, and unlike the Vietnam War, it lacked the same level of cultural and political controversy. Yet, its consequences were immense, shaping the balance of power in East Asia and solidifying the division of Korea, a situation that remains one of the world's most enduring flashpoints. The Korean War was a brutal, complex, and deeply consequential conflict that deserves to be remembered. It was a war fought not only with bullets and bombs, but with ideology and political will, defining the Cold War's early years and setting the stage for decades of global tensions. Though often overlooked, its impact still resonates today, as the Korean Peninsula remains one of the most heavily militarized and politically volatile regions in the world. I hope you enjoyed that episode of 5-Minute Warfare from 5minutewarfare.com. If you did, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to 5minutewarfare.com/coffee to see how. You may also be interested in our other 5-minute podcasts. Check them out at 5minuteproductions.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.